Good morning, guys. Ibrahim Awad, serious injury and wrongful death attorney out of Atlanta, Georgia. The one thing that I always get asked is, what is the best type of car insurance? Usually, when I get this question, it's from the perspective of, is it State Farm? Is it Geico? Is it Allstate? Is it Progressive? Which car insurance is best? And the reality is, it's not about the company, it's about the actual policy. So when you look up policies and you ask about quotes, a lot of times you're not comparing apples to apples because just people don't know. People don't know really what to ask for. So hopefully my goal for this video is to give you a bit of an insight as to what you should actually be looking for. So first of all, let me deconstruct a word: full coverage. Now, full coverage is just one of these words that people throw around, including insurance agents, and it's just not enough to throw out the word full coverage, because that really doesn't tell you much. What is full coverage? Now, when you do ask this question, usually the answer is, oh, it means that you also have uninsured motorist coverage. In the state of Georgia, you're not required to have uninsured motorist coverage. You're just supposed to have liability. And the liability limits here in the state of Georgia, the minimum limits are $25,000 per person, $50,000 per accident. So if I were to call up an insurance company and say, hey, I'm looking for a quote for my vehicle, they usually ask you, well, would you like liability coverage or full coverage? Okay, so to answer the question is, what is liability coverage, i.e. the minimum amount of coverage? It's $25,000. I don't know why I'm looking at my hand right now when I'm saying that, but $25,000, okay? That's the bare minimum. That is what you need to drive on the road insured, okay? So that's the minimum. Now, full coverage, usually when people say that, it means it includes uninsured motorist coverage. But that phrase doesn't tell you what's the policy limit, okay? So when you say full coverage, is it $25,000 excess coverage, meaning it's added on to the defendant's insurance coverage? Is it for $50,000? Is it for $100,000? The policy limit is something that you definitely need to know. So when somebody says full coverage, including an insurance agent, you should ask, what do you mean by that? Okay, and I'm going to tell you guys what I recommend before the end of the video. I will tell you what my recommendation is. But first, we have to define some terms, because if you use the word full coverage, it's really, it doesn't tell you anything. It's vague, it's obtuse, it's not a real detailed phrase. So be cognizant of that. So $25,000 in liability coverage and $25,000 in uninsured motorist coverage can be referred to as full coverage, but that's not something I recommend. So I want to show you a couple of things. Here's a Geico policy, okay? And I've marked out the identifying details so we do not breach any confidentiality, okay? Now, what I highlighted here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually post this photo so you can see it. It should pop up. It says uninsured motorist coverage, okay? Uninsured motorist BI, meaning bodily injury. Uninsured motorist PD, okay? And it says the word add on, okay? Right there, all right? It says add on, okay? What does that mean? That means that if somebody hits you, okay, and they're only insured by minimum limits, liability coverage of $25,000, and God forbid that your injury claim is worth more than $25,000, it means that you can recover that person's limit of $25,000 and additionally be protected by $50,000 in addition, i.e. added on to their $25,000. So you have the potential of recovering up to $75,000. That's what that means, okay? However, Uninsured motorist coverage comes in two flavors, okay? It comes in added on coverage, and it comes in reduced by coverage. And you need to know the difference between these two things, okay? So first, this is added on, okay? $50,000 added on coverage, okay? That's a Geico policy. If you don't have Geico, it's almost identical in others. This is Progressive, right? When you look up uninsured motorist coverage, boom, it says added on right there. In this particular case, $50,000. It's added on coverage, okay? Let's take a look at Ameriprise. Ameriprise, this is another policy, and I actually highlighted two things. Uninsured motorist coverage, added on, okay? Added on. How much? $50,000. It's very, very common to have added on coverage of $50,000, okay? Let me show you a distinction. Here's State Farm, okay? Uninsured motorist coverage, look at that. It says difference in limits. It does not say added on, and it does not say excess coverage. Sometimes it could say added on or excess. They both mean the same exact thing. It's in addition to any other policy by the defendant, okay? But this one says difference in limits. What does that mean? Well, that means if, let's say that the person that hit you, the defendant, the wrongdoer, the person that hit you has $50,000 on his policy. Those are the limits. And you're able to recover the $50,000, and you have uninsured motorist coverage for $50,000. However, it's the difference in limits, and you've already recovered 50, then this uninsured motorist policy does not help you at all. It doesn't help you at all. It's useless because you've already recovered 50,000, right? Had it been added on coverage, then potentially you could recover another $50,000 added on to the $50,000 defendant policy, okay? Or excess to the $50,000 defendant policy. This one, difference in limits, $50,000 minus $50,000, zero. You have no additional coverage. Now, when does this help? When does the reduced by coverage, or here as it says, difference in limits coverage, actually help? Well, in this case, it's $50,000. Let's say that the defendant's policy is $25,000. You recover the $25,000, and this one is $50,000, so $50,000 minus $25,000 is $25,000. So the difference in limits is $25,000. So you can get an additional $25,000 after you get the defendant's policy of $25,000. So you have up to $50,000. That's another way of saying it. With this policy, you can recover up to $50,000 total for your claim. So it's not all bad, but it's definitely not as good as added on coverage. It's even more useful when the defendant is uninsured. He's maybe an excluded driver under that policy, or he maybe stole the vehicle, or he ran away, like you don't know if he is insured or not insured. Then your coverage comes into play up to $50,000. So it's not all bad, right? So if you had $1 million uninsured motorist coverage reduced by, it really doesn't make a difference, okay? Because it's $1 million. You're protected up to $1 million. And it's reduced by, but who cares? Like, $1 million is, God forbid you need to use that, because that would mean it's a catastrophic injury or a wrongful death. But you get my point. If it's $25,000 uninsured motorist coverage difference in limits, that's problematic. $50,000, it still is not good. $100,000, it hurts a little bit less. $1 million, you're good to go. I mean, it really doesn't matter if it's a difference in limits policy. Of course, added on is always better, but you get my point. There are grades to this. It's not black and white. There are shades of gray. So this is a particular policy that the client just did not benefit because we already collected the defendant's insurance policy and he didn't have additional coverage even though he's been paying dutifully his premiums every single month. In this particular situation, it didn't help him, okay? Here's a policy where you can see uninsured motorist right there, rejected. Rejected. That means if, God forbid, the defendant is uninsured, you get no benefit from paying your premiums every single month to your insurance company. It makes no difference. You've rejected uninsured motorist coverage and therefore you have no protection. If, God forbid, he only has $25,000 minimum limits and your case is worth more than $25,000, you get no benefit. You rejected uninsured motorist coverage. It's horrible. You've been paying your premiums every single month and you do not get any benefit. Okay? So this is where the policyholder rejected uninsured motorist coverage. So, to summarize, if you get uninsured motorist coverage and you can afford $1 million policy, I shouldn't say you can't afford, but it's not feasible for you to get $1 million policy. It's not feasible for you to get a $500,000 policy. Basically, at minimum, make sure the uninsured motorist coverage is at least the added on coverage, the excess coverage, that flavor, not the difference in limits, not the reduced by coverage, but the added on coverage. You need that as a basic thing because far too often there are people driving on the roadways that are not insured, or they hit and run, or you can't find them. Somehow something happens. So you definitely need to be protected. And for the most part, it's not that much more every month, okay? My recommendation is to purchase at least $50,000 in uninsured motorist coverage added on. I mean, that's the bare minimum. I know you don't have to have it. It's not required by law to operate your motor vehicle. You don't have to have it. But my recommendation is to have added on coverage for $50,000. And it just so interestingly, coincidentally, the three policies that I showed you where the policyholder did not reject uninsured motorist coverage, all three had $50,000. Okay? So that's number one. Number two, very, very, very important, is to have something called medical payment coverage. And on this policy, this is Ameriprise. I already showed you this policy, but I want to point your attention to another part of the policy. It says here medical expense. Medical expense. On other policies, it would say medical payment coverage. It's referred to as MedPay for short, okay? And on this particular policy, it says $5,000 each. $5,000 each. Think about this as additional health insurance, okay? But it's much better than health insurance. Much, 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 much better. Because if, God forbid, you're in a wreck and you have medical payment coverage, and in this particular case, it's $5,000, that means that Ameriprise is going to pay toward your medical expenses $5,000, okay, of your medical expenses right off the bat. Not even waiting for the defendant's insurance policy to pay anything. And best thing, you don't have to pay back the $5,000 because essentially you've been paying for it every month, okay? You've been paying your premiums every month to insure you and to protect you for $5,000 medical payment coverage. This is different than the policy limit, okay? This medical payment coverage, this medical expense coverage, pays your medical bills immediately, doesn't even wait for the defendant to do anything with his or her policy, okay? And it says here, $5,000 each person, okay? Now, that's good, $5,000 each person, but I recommend more. I recommend at least $10,000 per person. This is talking about medical expense coverage, also called medical payment coverage, also called MedPay, okay? To have $10,000 of medical payment coverage. Now, why do I say at least $10,000 medical payment coverage? Because out of the hundreds of cases that I have handled, okay, and many of which are serious injury and wrongful death cases, for the most part, generally speaking, on average, but you take away the extremes, okay, medical bills for the common wreck average about $10,000, okay? That's from my experience. So to just protect you, I urge everyone to have at least $10,000 of medical payment coverage. Now, some attorneys differ, and that's okay, as to how much, and they say more, okay? Some people say more, like $25,000 of medical payment coverage, which if you can do it, please do, because, you know, insurance is one of those strange things. You buy, but hope you never use, okay? So I have a friend of mine who has $100,000 for medical payment coverage, and I was perplexed. I was like, why do you have $100,000 of medical payment coverage? And this is what he said. He said, well, if God forbid I'm in a wreck and I'm unconscious, the amount of diagnostic work that's going to be done at the hospital, when I'm taken by ambulance, when I'm going to the, I go to the hospital, I got the hospital bill, the radiology bill, the facility bill, the CT scans, the MRIs. If I'm unconscious, they're going to have to do all these things. And I estimate that at least, at minimum, in this day and age where medical expenses are through the roof, then I'm going to need at least $100,000. And I'm like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. So that is his position. That is his perspective. His opinion is to have at least $100,000 in medical payment coverage. He can afford it. He can do it. Good for him. From my perspective, seeing a lot of variety in the types of wrecks that come across my desk, at minimum, again, that's the qualifier, at minimum have $10,000 of medical payment coverage. That money goes to you. It goes to, pay your medical expenses before the defendant is held accountable for those medical bills. Okay? Super, super, super important. So don't forget that. So to summarize, and I didn't want to take this long on this video because, in this day and age, we have very short attention spans. But I thank you for listening to it this far. The two things that we discussed: have uninsured motorist coverage, added on coverage, at least $50,000, and have medical payment coverage of at least $10,000. Super, super important. I hope this kind of breaks it down a little bit. I aim to provide more information and hopefully more value to all of you, to the public at large, so that we can better understand what kind of insurance is best. Of course, as always, if you have any questions, please comment below. And as always, God bless and take care. Thanks for watching.